What does it cost to actually not just buy an e-bike, but own an e-bike? What's it going to cost you over the lifetime, however long that is, you own that bike? Well, today I'm going to tell you. Good morning and welcome back to KPBC on a really frosty cold morning. I'm riding solo today. My buddy Kerry is head deep in moving house, so we've been off the bikes for about a month now because, well, mainly because of that, but also because my bike, my e-bike, has been at the doctor's for a major fix. So in this video, my intention is today we're going to be doing a bit of the cinder track again, but the point of today is I want to try and explain to you what the actual cost of e-bike ownership looks like. Now I know that's could be totally different from everybody, but for me personally, what has it cost me in 3 years of ownership on this particular bike? So the point of today is I want to explain to you what it's costing me over 3 years of ownership to actually buy and run this e-bike. I've been off the bike for the last 4 weeks really because the bike's been poorly, and my bike's done roughly 1,200 miles and it's coming up to being about 2 years and 8 months old. It's got a Gen 4 Bosch motor inside it. It suddenly started doing some really weird stuff. Now on my remote here, where you've got the various colours that indicate what mode you're in, what was happening was I was turning it on and it was just flashing white. And if I've got a video of it, I'll put a video in here now. But yeah, it was flashing white and it wasn't beeping and it just wouldn't turn on. It would just go back off again. And you could do that turning on process, 12, 13, 14, 15 times before eventually it would just randomly just start up. And it would also happen whilst I was out riding. Could do 10, 12 plus miles and then all of a sudden, bang, it just did it. Now, I spoke to a local bike technician and he said to me, bad news buddy, he said, I think you've got a problem with water inside your motor that's shorting your motherboard or something like that, He said, we're going to have to send it away for a refurb. Now a refurb can be a little or a lot, depends what they have to do, but normally, and it's really recommended, that when you have these sort of scenarios, you get the full refurb done, which means that they put all new seals in, they grease everything up, put new bearings in where needed, but they don't just replace them, they put in a better quality of what's already in there, because the Gen 4s are renowned for being rubbish. So yeah, I had to send it into a bike shop. He stripped it down, he pulled the motor out, he sent the motor off to the e-bike centre, I think it's called. I'll leave a link in the description. And general cost for that, just for the e-bike, just for the motor refurb or overhaul or whatever they call it, it's about 400 quid. So it's not cheap. And a bike of this age and this sort of mileage is typically, I've been told, where this will happen, especially if you do a lot of winter riding or you're in the wet or depending on how hard you wash your bike, you know, water's going to get into that motor because the seals just aren't great. And whilst my bike was in there, there was also another cube in there for exactly the same reason. Now it's not just cubes that are, you know, are prone to this. It is the Gen 4 motor. So yeah, taking that into account, that was quite an expensive visit to the doctors for my bike, and it's put us out of action for a good month. And that got me thinking, I wonder how much money I've actually, you know, put into this bike. Apart from the actual cost of buying it, how much money have I put into it? So I'm going to give you a breakdown of all that, and I'll list it all on screen as to what it's cost me, and you know, hopefully that'll give you an idea of the cost of ownership, because it isn't just buying, you know, the bike and the purchase price. To look after these things, you've got to make the right decisions and do a bit of preventative maintenance. So yeah, I'm heading off up the cinder track. Don't know how far I'm going to go yet, but I'm certainly going to try and aim for Ravenscar, and then maybe decide whether I want to come back or not at that point. It all depends whether I have any issues with this. Touch wood, I'm hoping problem solved, so we'll see. First thing I wanted to talk about is the cost of purchase. Now, this is a Cube Stereo Hybrid 160 Action Team. At the time when I bought it back in 2023, I think it was, this was retailing at just over £7,000, and I managed to get a decent deal on it with some percentage off, and I got it to £5,800 roughly, and I got it on 36 months interest-free credit, so it works out about £155 a month. Over the 3 years of ownership, I reckon I'm probably gonna, this bike's probably going to be worth just over £2,000 when I come to sell it on. So I've got depreciation of about £3,500 maybe. But again, you'll get that on any bike that you buy. You'll get depreciation. Tell you what, it's nice to be out today. It's been raining and whatnot for what seems like weeks and weeks and weeks. And today is the first day where we've got a clear blue sky. Admittedly, it's absolutely freezing. Thank you. But, you know, I can deal with that. Right, so after my initial purchase, we're going to talk about what did I actually spend on it before I actually got it on the road. And basically setup costs, let's call it. Okay, so first thing I did was I had it Invisi-framed. Now, Invisi-framed, depends where you go, who you get it done by, but I got it done by a professional, so it worked cheap. I got new tyres put on it because I didn't like the tyres that were on it at the time. I put bigger tyres on it, 2.6s. I had it tubeless set up because most bikes don't come tubeless set up nowadays, so I had to get that done. I got mud guards put on. They're the particular mud guards that I like, and they work well for me without being too obtrusive or too in your face. And I had a new seat put on it because I didn't like the seat that came with it, so I had this Horizon seat put on. And all of that just to get set up and on the road cost me about 450 quid. Now I know that's, you don't need to do all of that, but some of that I would certainly recommend getting an Invisi frame done, which was going to cost you, you know, a couple of £100, I reckon. And tubeless setup, if it doesn't come tubeless setup, you're definitely going to need that. And say, if you could pick a bike that's got all the right components, such as the right tyres and the right seats and stuff, you don't need to bother with all of that. But yeah, initial setup costs 450 quid. Well, I was kind of hoping that with it being frozen today, that the muddy parts of this track would be nice and frozen too, but it's not. It's actually wet and slick, so yeah, steady as she goes today. Gee, I won't mind living there. Rather nice, although the access road's interesting. So most of these prices I'm giving you today, by the way, these costs, just bear in mind, it's specific to my own experience of ownership. I am estimating some of these costs based on what I can remember. It was a few years ago now, like, since I had some of these things done. And yeah, you don't necessarily need to have some of these things done. And I mean, one good thing is if you're quite mechanically able and you can do these things yourself, then great. You'll save yourself an absolute pocket full of money. Which brings me on nicely to the cost of maintenance. Now, obviously, there's a lot of maintenance to be done on a bike over its, you know, its lifespan, let's say. But I reckon, me personally, I've been getting this bike serviced twice a year. Now, a service costs £60 each time, and that's just for the check over. That's not including any components or anything. So, if you take that into account over 3 years of ownership, that's 360 quid spent on just service, no parts. And again, if you're mechanically able and you know what to do and you can service it yourself, great. But I know a little bit, I don't know enough, and I do like a second opinion from a specialist, a professional, who can tell me things like when a bearing's, you know, on its way out or whatever it may be. So we're 6 miles in now. We're just coming up to the 8-bend Wyke on the right hand side here. It's warming up a little bit actually. It does feel a little bit warmer, and there's less ice around. I don't know whether that's just because we're under the trees, but there's certainly a lot more mud about. So my nice new sealed Bosch motor is going to get put to the test today because it's going to get wet again. Oh yeah, it's a bit of water about. I wasn't going to put my waterproofs on today, but I'm glad I did. It's interesting. Look at this. Nice reflection. Right, here's a breakdown of what it's cost me in parts over the ownership lifetime of this bike. Now, I'm talking about here as in these are parts that have needed to be replaced because they've either failed or they're worn out or they just needed doing due to general, you know, riding of the bike, wear and tear, that type of thing. So, over the lifetime of the bike, this 3 years, I've had to change the tyres pretty much every year. Now, I do a lot of winter riding, so I don't like it when the tyres get too low on grip. So, tyres, I've probably spent about £120 a year on them. So yeah, grips, I do like my grips, and I have tried several different types of grips. I do like the DMRs, and eventually they get a bit worn, so I've had to buy probably 3 sets of grips over that time period, so that's 75 quid. New brake pads. Obviously, every bike needs brake pads changing every now and again. I don't use really expensive ones, so I reckon 3 sets per year. That's probably going to cost me about 90 quid. Now, I've had to have a new parts of my drivetrain have been changed. I reckon all in, that's probably cost me about 250 quid for drivetrain. Tweaks. I've had to change the crank arms. Now my crank arms failed. The ones that came on the Cube, which were Cube's own brand, were knackers. They were terrible. The inside bit here worn out and they just kept slipping. So I changed them. I could have changed for a cheap pair again, but what's the point in doing that? So I got a nice pair of Hope ones. They cost me 300 quid. And I would say I've replaced most of the bearings on the bike. You know, the ones that come with the Cubes, they're not very good quality and they only last, you know, I think they lasted about a year and they needed replacing. So I did replace them with decent ones. Again, I can't recommend enough. You know, if you have to replace a component, don't replace it with something cheap. Put something decent in there and it'll last you. Bearings, probably spent about 150 quid on that. My headset eventually wore out and gave way. And now, as you know, with the Cube headsets, they have this internal wiring that goes through the headset, which is an absolute nightmare. And every time you have to do any sort of bearing change, you've got to fully dismantle everything, take your cables off. It's a right bugbear. So again, I took my own advice and I thought, right, if I'm going to have this all dismantled, I'll put a nice decent headset back on that doesn't have to go through all that again. So I chose this lovely Hope one. I didn't have to do that, you know, don't get me wrong, you don't have to do these sort of things, but that's just the way I approach it. And that cost me about 300 quid to replace that. And then lastly, the last bit of maintenance I've had is this motor, which has just recently come back from having a full overhaul. We had water get inside it, plus also the bearings that go, the crank bearings that go through the middle had worn out and they were loose, and I think that's probably part of the reason I was getting the error, not just because of water. So yeah, a full overhaul from the e-bike centre is going to cost you about 400 quid. I had, at the same time, I had my rear bearing replaced by the professional. So all in all, it cost me about 520 quid for him to do all of that for me. He sent it off, he dismantled and put it all back together again. So, over the lifetime of this bike, and you're sitting down, I've spent roughly £2,600, £2,700 in maintenance costs. Now that could have been reduced if I'd used cheaper components and not bought the Hope. You know, I might have saved myself 500 quid by doing that. But yeah, you're definitely looking at a couple of grand's worth of maintenance there. But yeah, that's quite a shocker. That's a lot more money than I thought I would be spending on this bike. So when you take all that into account for the purchase price, which cost me 155 a month, and then the maintenance costs on top of that, that's actually costing me for this bike about £225 a month. So yeah, I mean that's a decent wad of money for anybody really. And you know, that we're only talking about a £6 bike here. This is not, you know, an 8, 9, 10, £12,000 weapon. This is you know, somewhere sort of between an entry and medium level bike. Components wise, you know, such as forks and all the rest of it, they're good, but I think where Cube is let down a little bit is some of the ways, some of the skimp on some of the cheaper stuff like the bearings and say the crank arms and the headset and stuff. They're not very good, and you know, at some point in the lifespan of that bike you're going to have to replace them, and I wouldn't recommend replacing them with like for like. You're going to have to spend money on upgrading them. So now I've told you like what the basic sort of running costs have been for this bike. I'm going to tell you what I've also spent on top of it. And these are just optional extras, let's say. So we've got carbon riser bars. I like a higher rise, so I obviously purchased them. That's probably cost me 90 quid. I put on DMR magnesium pedals, lightweight pedals. Don't particularly need them, to be honest, but they're the ones that I've always ridden. I just like them. 60 quid. One of the biggest expenses apart from the motor has been replacing the coil shock. Obviously I had a normal Flotex on the back of there, and I put on the Fox DHX2. That probably cost me around 400 quid to do that. So it's probably, you know, when you're looking at that, I'd probably put about 650 quid worth of extras on top of it. So let's have a look and recap on what it's cost me. Okay, so, and I'm going to put this all on screen. Cost of the bike, £5,580. Maintenance cost over 3 years, £2,665. Depreciation, if you want to factor that in, I personally don't, but it is a cost at the end of the day, £3,580. Optional extras that I spent on it, so let's call them toys and upgrades, 650 quid. So if you factor all that in and add all that up over 3 years, not including depreciation by the way, this bike has cost me £8,895. So that's quite a lot over the actual cost, initial cost of the bike at what, £5,580. So bearing in mind, you buy the bike, you think it's going to cost you £155 a month. That's what I thought. But actually, when you look back on all of the maintenance costs and all of the things I've had to have done just to keep this bike running and keep it in good nick, it's probably been closer to £250 a month. So just remember that when you're buying an e-bike, yes, you pay the monthly cost, but there's going to be significant costs on top to keep this thing running. And depending on the type of bike you buy, will obviously depend on what them costs will be. So for instance, I'm just taking a guess, but if you bought a Santa Cruz Vala with the Gen 5 Bosch motor, which is supposed to be significantly better as far as the seals and that are concerned, then you're probably not going to, you know, incur that motor overhaul cost. You're probably going to get better components in certain areas like bearings and things like that, so you're probably not going to need to particularly swap anything out as such. Yes, you're still going to do upgrades. Potentially, you might want to put a coil on it or whatever, or you might want to put new tyres on. You're certainly going to want to put an Invisiframe on it, your own pedals, your own seat, maybe your own bars. So there is stuff you're still going to spend on it, but the Santa Cruz is going to cost you significantly more. It's probably going to be, for the similar sort of spec as to what this is, you're probably looking at £7,000, £8,000, £9,000 for the Vala. So it's kind of, it just depends, doesn't it, really, I suppose, at the end of the day. What is your budget? I mean, my budget at the end of the day could only get me this. And even today, something like a Santa Cruz Vala or a Bullet is still slightly out of my reach as far as money goes, because I've got to factor in, again, maintenance costs on top of that. So even though the Vala could be, I don't know, I'm just guessing, but let's say it's £200 a month, right? So it's £50 a month more than this. Then I've still got potentially somewhere between £50 and £100 a month on top of that, just for running costs, as in maintenance costs and things like that over the life of the bike. But it could be lower, because I say, some of the problems might not be there, such as crappy bearings and the Gen 4 Bosch motor seal issue. So, yeah, when you look at these figures, it's quite interesting. And don't get me wrong, I wouldn't change a thing, other than, now that I know about these problems with the Bosch Gen 4, I would certainly be looking at, especially if you're buying a second-hand bike, avoid that and try and get into the Gen 5 market, because yes, it's only less than a year old, but we don't know exactly how well that's going to survive over time. But you know, initial reports from the bike maintenance people is it's better built, and they've sort of addressed some of these problems they had with the Gen 4. But yeah, it's Valentine's Day, and the point of this ride is to get out, enjoy the day, enjoy the view. I mean, look at it, it's fantastic round here. And yeah, share some love for that, your bike. I love it. Even though it's cost me an arm and a leg, it's money well spent in my eyes. It is, it gets me out. It's the one thing I love doing. I hope this video's proved a little useful to you and a little bit of an eye-opener as to what e-bikes might cost you. But in the long run, personally, I think it's worth every single penny.